Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Wenn mein Stündlein wohanden ist, which translates to In the hour of my death is at hand. Now this is a pretty interesting chorale, has a couple cadences that reflect that structure that we were talking about in yesterday's video, but also in videos that I've made before, where we do I guess depending on how you look at it, either a very quick and brief modulation to the subdominant, or we're cadencing on the subdominant. I really don't know which one is which, but it's one or the other. The first cadence we have is one of those, and we also have one in the second system as well. But we also have some incomplete chords here and some interesting chromaticism that we're going to take a look at as well. But that being said, let's just get started with the analysis. We start on C major, we end on C major, no key signatures, so I reckon we're in the key of C major. Let me go ahead and move my notes to the side as well so they're a little easier to see. We have a tonic triad first, C major in root position. We then have another tonic triad, just some voice exchange, and the bass leaps up an octave. And we have a passing seventh in the bass. We then have A, C, F sharp, and A, which is F sharp diminished in first inversion. That's 7/6 of 5, because F sharp is our leading tone of the dominant. G, D, G, and B, that's our 5 chord in root position, G major, passing seventh in the bass. Then we have E, G, G, and C. That's a tonic triad in first inversion, C major over E. Then we have D, B, F, and D. It's a B diminished triad in first inversion, so 7/6. Then we have C, C, E, and E, so a doubled third triad. That's kind of interesting, but it's still a 1 chord in root position. And because I'm calling this first cadence an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of the subdominant, let's go ahead and just say that this is our common chord between F, the tonic of C also being the dominant of F, and then we cadence on 1. So this is just a cadence. Honestly, it sounds like we're cadencing on 4 because there's really no setup. But because there's really no language that I'm aware of to describe what this cadence is without talking about it like how I have, the fact that it doesn't have a label, there should definitely be a label. Maybe I need to do some more reading. Maybe someone has talked at length about this. But we're immediately going right back to the key of C major, and this F is now 4. So this analysis looks kind of wonky. It would feel much better if we called this 5 of 4 going to 4, or just 1 going to 4, whatever way you call it. So then we have C, C, E, G, and E. That is a tonic triad in root position. We have some passing tones in the tenor and the melody. We then have C, E, G, and G. That's another tonic triad in root position, so no need to reanalyze. We have some passing tones in the inner voices. We then have G, G, E, and G, and I think one way we could analyze this is 3/6. This could be considered an incomplete E minor triad, but I think what's more likely to occur here is a 5 chord, G, G, D, and G. But this is an instance of counterpoint, and it's kind of hard to fully extrapolate what's happening. But I think this E is an accented non-chord tone, and we have a double passing tone figure here. And this is a root position 5 chord, depending on how you look at it. It ultimately depends. But afterwards we have A, C, C, and E. So we have a 6 chord afterwards. So we have a deceptive progression, or 3 going to 6. It depends on how you analyze. 3 does want to go to 6, but 5 also can go to 6. We have a passing tone in the melody, which would also turn the chord into a 4/6 chord, depending on how you look at it. But I'm okay with just calling this a 6th. This chord actually has some room for debate. This one, not so much. Then we have E, G, B, and G. Here we have an actual E minor triad in root position, 6 going to 3. It's like a transitive progression. We would expect 6 to go to 2, but here we have 6 going to 3, so a 5th up rather than a fifth down. Then we have A, C, and F. That is an F major triad in first inversion. This F right here is not a non-chord tone, it belongs to the triad. We then have B, G, G, and F. That is a G7 chord over B, so 5, 6, 5. And then we have a C major triad. So we have a very interesting cadence here to end this section. It's imperfect authentic, and it's preceded by two inverted chords, which is very interesting. It's not uncommon to see an inverted predominant, but it's relatively uncommon to see an inverted dominant chord. Alright, looking ahead, we have another one of these cadences on F. So I call it imperfect authentic cadence ? Because that's how I'm analyzing it, because that's the language that we have. But there's obviously something interesting going on here, and what we can call it might be up for debate. But afterwards we have another root position tonic triad. The tenor leaps up an octave. That's it, so no need to reanalyze. We then have an interesting chord. This chord right here, it printed an E. It's actually an F here. So I'll make that note head a little bit bigger. We have D, C, B, and F. And I think, D, C, D, and F. And I think the C is an accented non-chord tone. And really it's this B that we're looking for, rather than an incomplete 2-7 chord, which is, probably a perfectly fine analysis. I think this is a 7-6 chord, and these are non-chord tones. That's just what it is, because when we're linking a tonic triad to another tonic triad, I just think it makes more sense to have a dominant in between, and the fact that the notes are there, that's just where my brain goes analytically, but I think a 2-7 chord is fine as well. We then have E, G, C, and E. That's the tonic triad I was talking about in first inversion, passing tone in the bass. Then we have G, D, G, and D. We have a very interesting chord here. It is a thirdless G chord, which is interesting because we would expect a third in the chord to give it its quality, but we know that 5 is being implied here, but there's no third. It's just an open fifth. But we have some counterpoint going on in the inner voices, and then we have A, G, G, and C. We have another 5 chord going to a 6 chord, more specifically a 6-7 chord in root position, and then we have 4 non-chord tones. So the red light's going off on my head here. There's probably a passing chord. We have B, D, F, and D. We do in fact have a passing 7 chord, and this pattern's not super uncommon. 5, 6, 7 going to 1 especially. There's definitely some ascending adjacent harmony. I'm not calling it a parallel harmony because the way they're spelled the chords are not spelled parallel to one another, and parallel harmony implies something different. You see a lot of parallel harmony in piano music. You see a lot of parallel harmony in post-tonal, like French writing, like Debussy and Ravel. You see a lot of parallel chords. It's kind of just a part of their language. But 5, 6, 7, 1, that's just an ascending chordal sequence. Chords that are adjacent to one another. Then we have a passing tone in the alto. We then have C, C, G, and E, and I think this is where we modulate to the key of F very briefly before we get our tonic again, F major. Now this next cadence is very interesting. We have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of G major. It still sounds like a half cadence to me, but we've set up G so many times. We have F sharps in the alto as early as the next measure, F sharps in the bass. It's pretty clear that G is being tonicized, but it's functioning like a half cadence. But I think we do so via C major, so this F major chord is still our 4. We then have D, F, B, and D. So 4 is going to 7, 6, B diminished over D, and that goes to C, G, C, and E, which is a root position tonic triad with a passing tone in the alto. We then have C, C, E, and E with some counterpoint going on here. I think really just a 1 chord still being implied there. And then we get an interesting chord. We leap up an octave here, and then we get this leap up a major sixth rather than a minor sixth, C, D, F sharp, A, which is D7 over C. That's a 5 chord and third inversion of 5. And then we move to G afterwards. So B, D, G, and B. That's our 5 chord, which is now in the key of C major, in the key of G major or tonic. And then we have a passing tone, a little bit of counterpoint going on in the tenor. Tenor is a very active line in this chorale. We then have F sharp, A, and C. That is a root position F sharp diminished triad. And then we have some non-chord tones going on here. G, B, G, and B. That's an incomplete G major triad in root position. We don't have a fifth in the chord, and we've doubled the third instead of tripling the root, which is against what the textbook would have taught when I was in harmony class, but, and Bach spells with doubled roots and doubled thirds with some frequency. I mean, you've seen it in this chorale. We then have D, D, F sharp, and A. That's a root position D major triad. It's a 5 chord, and then we cadence on 1, G, D, G, and G. Interestingly, again, we have just an open fifth here. So the fact that there is no third in this chord and we don't get it until after the cadence is very unusual. The fact that we get F here, F natural rather, as opposed to F sharp, I think the modulation happens on this G rather than on the previous G, but it ultimately doesn't matter too much. This is a 5 chord with a passing seventh in the bass and another passing tone in the tenor. And we're getting ready for a perfect authentic cadence in the key of C, probably the most normal of all of the cadences that we've had so far. We have E, G, G, and C. That is a tonic triad, C major in first inversion, neighbor tone in the bass, passing tone in the tenor. We have E, B, G, and D, and you might call this an E minor triad, an E minor 7 chord in root position. But I think what's going on here is that this G that's being implied here with the dotted quarter note and this E in the bass are both accented non-chord tones, and really what we're looking at is this D, this B, this F, and this D, which is a 7/6 chord. And I always feel like when we have a tonic triad that what's a better way to say it? When we have tonic triads that are 2 beats apart from one another, you see it very consistently in Bach's music. You see 1/6, 7/6, 1, 1, 7/6, 1/6. It's just a pattern that occurs, and there's usually a 7 chord to be seen when linking 2 tonic triads. Not always, but often. And in this case, it's interesting because the 3 chord is on the other side. Usually the chord is mistaken for a 2 chord, or I should be careful when I say mistaken. I think 3 is a perfectly fine analysis. I just say that it's more likely for us to see a dominant functioning chord connecting 2 tonics, and the fact that the notes are there means that there's an argument to be made. So that's why I analyze it that way. But I don't think it's the only correct analysis. But afterwards we have some non-chord tones, a passing tone and a neighbor tone. Then we have C, D, G, and D. But I think what we have going on here is kind of an interesting chord. This C being an accented non-chord tone, and then we're looking at G, G, B, G, G, and D. So I think a 5 chord's being implied here, but this E gets in the way. So I don't really know what's going on with this E here. You might hear it. This should be a 5/6. You might hear this as a 3/6/4. 1 going to 3 is kind of an unusual progression. We of course see it from time to time, but it's kind of unusual. So we never get the full G major triad, but I think really this E here is just counterpoint to link the D and the F. E being one of the 2 tendency tones, or one of the 2 tendency groups in the major scale, right? We have the one that is the most important, the leading tone going to the tonic, but the other half step of F going to E or vice versa is another point of contention, or not necessarily contention, but tendency. It's a tendency tone. One usually wants to go from one to the other. And then we have A, C, F, and F. That is an F major chord in first inversion, so 5-6 going to 4-6, a little bit of a deceptive progression, but we see 5 going to 4-6 from time to time. It's a relatively common progression using Bach's language, and just another example of a deceptive progression. He's just prolonging the progression instead of ending on a tonic. He's going to the 6 in the bass. 5 to 6 bass motion is really what implies the deceptive progression, but the fact that we're going down doesn't have the same effect. We have a passing tone in the tenor, and then we go to G, E, G, and E. There is a lot to decompress about this chord right here. I know it doesn't look like a lot, but the chord doesn't really have all of the makings of a triad that would make sense in this context. For starters, so if we saw G, E, G, and E, the first thing we might think is 3-6. And we've seen 3 go to 4. 4 doesn't usually go to 3. 4 usually goes to 5. But we do have the A going down to G here, so the bass is moving the way we would expect it to. But we never really get a full minor chord here because we have a B flat, and this B flat really eludes me. I think this B flat is more significant than just the fact that it's a very quick 16th note. I think that there's something being implied here. And the fact that we get a D minor on the next beat, which is just a 2-6 chord, so we have an example of descending, we have a descending line here, 5-4-3-2. I think that there's something to be read into that, but this B flat would effectively change the quality of the E minor triad to diminished. So the fact that E diminished is being seen in this context is kind of unusual, because that would be 7-6 of 4, because E is the leading tone to F, but the fact that we're seeing it after the fact is kind of unusual. E is also the 2 of 2. It'd be a diminished, it would be the equivalent of it being the supertonic in the key of D minor, so seeing it so close in proximity to the cadence is very unusual, but this chord still eludes me. I don't fully know what's going on or what the significance of this B flat is. There's no F in the chord, there's no dissonant counterpoint that's a result of keeping this natural, so that B flat is just an expressive tone, and I honestly don't know what to make of it. I offered 2 possible analyses. I think one of these is right, but even if we looked at this D and this A here, we would still have G and E, and that's just like open fifths. It's not very helpful in terms of analysis. But this chord is very interesting, probably the most interesting harmonic element of this chorale. If we just redacted the rest of it and just looked at that one chord, it's pretty unusual. But afterwards we have pretty much the makings of our standard cadence. We have D minor over F. If we had a C in the mix, it would be one of Bach's favorite chords. He loves his 2-6s. But his 2-6-5s. We don't see any 2-6-5s in this chorale. But afterwards we have G, D, G, and D. Another 5 chord that's just an open fifth. We don't have any third in the chord, which is unusual. And then we have our tonic triad and root position C, E, G, and C, and that one is complete. It's not unprecedented that we see chorales that have open fifths rather than a complete triad, or even an incomplete triad that omits the fifth, but it's definitely an older sound. It's something that's more antiquated, something that's associated with Renaissance music rather than music of Bach's time, because we've seen earlier chorales that show more tonal sensibilities than this chorale does, so it's very unusual. Makes me wonder Bach's relationship with the melody, and if he's heard any other harmonizations of this melody before he decided to harmonize it. But I'll leave you all with that. There's lots of intrigue in this chorale. The 2 imperfect authentic cadences, or subdominant cadences, as I guess is an appropriate term for them. The fact that a section ends with an imperfect authentic cadence. The fact that we have this strange descending harmonic pattern. and this also this ascending pattern as well. All very interesting, lots to dissect. But thank you so much for watching the video and continuing to support the channel. I really enjoy making these videos every day, and I look forward to tomorrow's analysis. I hope you take care.